Recording. I want to start tonight with just a word about last week. I think, and that will put us on a running start, I believe. Last week we discussed the beginnings of King David before he was King David, just little old David, and we discovered how his past was not so peachy. It was quite murky, dubious. According to the midrash that we quoted last week, he grew up for much of his life, and people thought he was a mamzer, and not the son of his father Yishai, but some other stranger. And he was just basically left outside, tending to the sheep, so as not to embarrass the family. They would keep him away at all costs. Now, throughout the week, a number of you reached out and expressed, I don't know if it was your concern about the midrash or just how it didn't sit well with you, whether you had problems with the storyline itself or some of the characters and what, like his mother, how could you do that to him, make him endure such embarrassment his entire life? I will say, when it comes to midrash, as we mentioned last week, it's not always clear whether they're meant literally or not. The one thing we can take away with certainty and confidence is the emotional reality that's being revealed from the midrash. The fact that David grew up feeling an outcast, hated by his brothers, which is actually borne out in the text itself, that is certainly one of the main messages being conveyed by the midrash. Whether the technicalities happened or not, did his father actually go and try to be with his maidservant who ended up being his wife? That we can only wonder if the midrash means it literally or not. The truth is, I did look in for more sources for the midrash, and I did find a lot of corroborating evidence. Perhaps most notably the Arizal. The Arizal discussed, who is the great Kabbalist in the 16th century. He quotes this midrash, and he takes it very seriously. In fact, he says it's a great secret of the universe. Why did David have to have such a nasty beginning? And in fact, his whole life, not just his life, but even his lineage, right? It's such a sloppy history, starting with Yehuda and Tamar, where he thinks she's a prostitute on the roadside, and continuing into Rus, who was a Moabite convert who put her first husband to death, right? Basically, right? He sinned by marrying her, and now she comes into the nation. And then David himself has such a tumultuous life. The Arizal writes that this was absolutely essential. He says, anytime, now listen well, this is a tremendous thing. Anytime there's something holy and pure coming into the world, it necessarily has to be shrouded in darkness and confusion. That is kind of, it's like almost like it has to sneak onto the scene. And the greater holiness that's latent inside of this thing, the greater the darkness and the confusion has to be surrounding the thing. So King David, who is the Mashiach, the one, the neshama that's going to bring out the ultimate redemption and make sense of all of the world's darkness and confusion, has to be shrouded in the most darkness and complicated and sticky life. Bring that out. That is the Arizal's commentary on the issue. What I want to do in our session tonight, at least, is examine and speculate how perhaps did this upbringing of David lead to many of the events and his victories that he had during his lifetime. I want to show, maybe you could call it speculation, but I think it's quite compelling how David's upbringing and the emotional makeup he must have had as a result, those enabled him and empowered him to be successful in his life and to be able to withstand what he had to. So let's move into the next. Pardon me a moment. I'll put you on mute just for the audio. I think is a little bit funny sometimes. If you want to speak up, please unmute yourselves. But sometimes the audio gets funny when there's a lot of people with their microphones on. So let's step in now. We last left our hero when he was just anointed as king. Okay, and if you weren't here last time, it doesn't make a difference really. We'll be discussing today one of the most famous events in the history of the world. Right, has become a saying, right? David versus Goliath, the paradigm of the underdog. It's the brains versus the brawn, strategy versus just brute force. Right, how David overcomes Goliath. I want to lead just what led up to that. What was going on over there? And that's really the very next section of Shmuel itself. Shmuel anoints David as the king. The prophet Samuel anoints David to be the king. Now, not many people know about that. Shmuel reveals to David and the family that was around that you are the chosen one of Hashem. You are going to be the next king. However, nobody else on the planet knows about this. All the other Jews believe that Saul is the king, and in fact he is. He's the practicing and acting king. Saul himself doesn't know. And to come to think of it, you may be familiar with that story where the kingship is ripped away from Saul, right? After his failure to defeat Amalek, he has this exchange with Shmuel, and Shmuel says to him, that's it, you blew it. You're not going to be the king anywhere. Hashem is going to replace you with someone else. And Saul kind of reaches for Shmuel and holds on to his garment, and it rips. And Shmuel turns to him and says, just like you've torn my garment, Hashem has torn the kingdom away from you. That incident, which to us is so significant, nobody else knew about it. Nobody knew that the kingdom was no longer Saul's. Right? Everyone, for all we know, Saul's going to continue forever. We don't know his king is, yeah? Okay. So let's listen what happens. The king, David is anointed as the king. Nobody really knows. So for now, he's still a shepherd. But lo and behold, Saul suddenly is taken by a spirit of melancholy and basically falls into depression. Because what happened was the spirit of Hashem left the anointed Saul and now transferred to King David. That's how the verse describes it. The spirit of Hashem left Shaul and went to David. That's it. Like he's the chosen one now. Shaul falls into this depression. And in fantastic irony, he looks for somebody to cheer him up. And his servants tell him, there's this boy who's a really good musician, and some of that music might just brighten your day, which is, of course, referring to David. Now, and indeed, they bring him David for a trial. They bring him King David, and he plays this music, and suddenly Saul feels, not only is he no longer depressed, he's in a state of happiness, and he suddenly feels inspired. He's lifted from the deepest depths that he was in, from the deep pain that he was feeling. He's finally lifted up, and he's able to feel like a person again. And he hires David full time. He says to Yishai, please send him to my house. I want him living by me. I want him around. He ends up appointing David to be in charge of different things in the kingdom. Just take a moment to reflect here before we get to Goliath, which is the very next scene. Where did David get this skill? This, first of all, the time to learn a technical instrument, right? The technical ability to play an instrument takes a lot of time to train yourself well. Okay, that certainly, he's out there with his sheep. That's all he has to do. It's just him and his harp. But more than the technical ability to play the instrument, where did he get this ability to find the right music to lift a person up from those painful places? There are many people who play instruments, but there are few who can do it the right way to bring out the perfect notes to elicit the proper emotions, especially to lift a person out of the depths of depression, which Shaul was suffering from. Who better knew that feeling than King David himself? David, who his whole life was an outcast, who his whole life was being cursed by his own brothers, as he attests. My brothers cursed me and they hate me. And he himself is composing songs, singing about his pain, and bringing on the Spirit of God to him. There are Tehillim that start Mizmor LeDavid, a psalm for David, a song for David. And there are Tehillim that start LeDavid Mizmor, to David, a song. So it switches back and forth, Mizmor LeDavid Mizmor. Strange, right? Rashi notes, the beginning of 23, if you want to look it up, Psalm 23, Rashi notes, the times when it says Mizmor LeDavid is when the Spirit of God came upon David, and then he began to compose the Tehillim. But there are times when it's LeDavid Mizmor, that David came first, when he was feeling not inspired. And he himself was able to lift himself up and achieve that inspiration and then merit the divine presence coming down. Right? From those deep depressions, or all that hardship that he was suffering, he had trained himself to be able to rise up through his music, through his compositions, and bring down the Spirit of Hashem onto him. So now Shaul has found the the perfect musician to lift him up, right? That David himself, who had suffered so much, was able to bring Shaul up. Just want to show that beautiful parallel, how it's the background of David, all that dark and painful beginning of his life, which enabled him now to serve as Shaul's musician. And of course, it's very important that he be in this position, because it's because of this that the whole story with Shaul and David will unfold and lead to all we know in Tanakh, right? So it was essential that he be in the palace. It was essential that he be the musician. And now we're learning that the background that David had and that which he endured was essential for making him the right man for Shaul. Okay. Yeah, that was one point I wanted to share. So far, so good. We're now ready to traverse into the front lines. Chapter 17 of Shmuel Aleph, it says that the Plishtim, the Philistines, were a constant thorn in the Jews' side. When they first conquered the land, they did not defeat all the enemies like they were supposed to. And just like Hashem promised, these are going to be a thorn in your side. They're never going to leave you alone. And one of the primary enemies that always battered them and would bother them are the Philistines. So once again, the Philistines come up, the Plishtim. They gather for war. They come to a place called Socho, and they even have such chutzpah. They feel so confident that they camp in Jewish territory. Rather than, staying on the border to flex their muscles, they even stepped onto Jewish turf because they realized they had so much of a mental hold over the Jewish armies, and the Jewish armies were just afraid and they backed up. And the verses described how they kept just coming closer and closer, just flexing their muscles. And they would have these little skirmishes until one day the Philistines set up and they say, maybe I'll show you the verses inside. You don't have to take my word for it. I'll share the screen. Philistines say, listen, why do we have to have all these little battles? Let's just pick one man from the Philistines and one man from the Jews, and they'll fight it out, and whoever wins, wins. If the Philistines wins, you'll be our slave, and if the Jewish man wins, then we'll be your slaves. All right, why bother with everybody fighting? Let's just do it this way. And the man that they choose was a man named Goliath. Goliath was, pardon me, I'm in the wrong place over here. The beginning of 17. Okay. This is it, verse 4. Pardon me for scrolling. I hope it doesn't bother your eyes. A champion of the Philistine forces stepped forward. His name was Goliath, son of Gath, and he was 6 cubits and a span tall. 6 cubits is above 9 feet tall. He was freakishly huge, gigantic. Goliath was a giant. And not only was he physically big, but his armor was like impenetrable. Bronze helmet, breastplate of scale armor, bronze breastplate weighing 5,000 shekels, huge, heavy armor, bronze greaves on his legs, and a bronze javelin from his shoulder, etc., etc., right? He's basically like a wall of iron. And he comes out, and he calls it, why shall you come out to engage in battle? I'm the Philistine, you are Saul's servants. Choose one of your men and let him come down against me. And then he says, then he starts getting dirty. I herewith defy the ranks of Israel. Chirafti et marachot Israel. Tnuli ish v'nelachama yachad. Get a man and let's fight it out. The Gemara says, what does it mean, Tnuli ish, get a man? Hashem ish milchama, like we say in Shirat Hayam, the Song of the Sea. God is referred to a man of war. So here he's being mecharef, he's blaspheming. Every morning, it says, for 40 days, he would come out and curse God, morning and evening. Goliath would come out and make fun of God and mock him. I defy the ranks of Israel and get me a man. He's referring to God, who's referred to as a man in Shirat Hayam, and let's fight it out. Okay? So day and night, Goliath is cursing God. And nobody does a word. Everyone is terror-stricken. They don't want to approach Goliath because he's gigantic. It's an impossible battle. They're all afraid. One day, Yishai, his 3 sons, Yishai, the father of David, his 3 sons go to the battlefield. And so David has to come home now. Instead of accompanying Saul, he has to come home to help his father, because now his 3 oldest sons are gone. Yishai says to him, would you mind go checking on your brothers? Vet aburasa arubatam tikach. The Midrash says that when the Jewish armies went to war, they would prepare a divorce contract for their wife. In the event that they wouldn't come back from the battles, they wouldn't want the woman to be stuck as an aguna who cannot get remarried. So he said, would you mind go getting their divorce documents? Go bring my son's divorce documents back home to their wives. Okay, so he basically sends David out on a mission. And David's there in the battlefield, looking for his brothers. And it happens to be that on that day, they're on the front line. And it happens to be that at that moment, he hears Goliath come out, cursing God. And he says, what in the world is going on over here? Right? David wakes up and says, what is going on over here? Is he this? And he says very passionately here, sorry, let me bring the screen back up. This uncircumcised man is cursing our God. We're going to let this go on. I'll fight him, basically, right? Okay, so David says, what will be done for the man who kills that Philistine and removes the disgrace from Israel? Right? Saul promised anybody who is willing to fight, I'll give him great wealth. He'll be exempt from the king's duty, and he'll get to marry my daughter. So David says, what will be done for the man who kills that Philistine? Basically, he doesn't want to approach Saul directly because that would be a chutzpah. So he keeps asking everyone around him, what did the king say the reward is for fighting? Who is that uncircumcised Philistine that he dares defy the ranks of the living God? Is there somebody cursing our... So David, without approaching Saul directly, is spreading news amongst the camp that he's willing to fight. His brother Eliab chastises him. We're not going to go into all the details, even though they're great. We just don't have the time. The things David said were overheard as planned and reported to Saul, who had him brought over. Okay, this is an important exchange between Shaul and David. David said, don't worry, let no man's, so I'll make it a little bit bigger here, let no man's courage fail him. Your servant will go and fight that Philistine. Nobody should worry about Goliath. I'll take care of it, David says. Shaul says to him, you can't go. You're only a boy, and he's been a warrior from his youth. You just, right? You play the music in my palace. You're not the guy fit to fight Goliath. Who do you think you are? So David reveals to him this incident. Your servant was tending to my father's sheep. His servant, meaning he's speaking to the king respectfully. I'm your servant. Right? I was tending to my father's sheep, and if a lion or a bear came and carried off an animal from the flock, I would go after and fight it. He says, I was actually, the other day I was watching my father's sheep, and a lion and a bear came to attack, and I was able, I didn't just, run for my life. I chased down, took care of the lion and the bear. And I'll do to that Plishti just like I did to the lion and the bear. For he has defied the ranks of the living God. And this is the key line. I'll get to it in a moment, Mr. Fox. This is the key line. The Lord who saved me from the lion and the bear will also save me from that Philistine. David, aside from expressing his power, he's not saying it's my power at all. The Lord who saved me from the lion and the bear will also save me from that Philistine. David here was showing his deep and powerful faith in God. He's saying, I'm not here to fight for myself, and I'm not here to show off my own skills. I don't even care for your daughter. I don't have time to show you to in the text. He was not interested in the reward. When he said, what's the reward? He was saying, you need to be rewarded for this? Just defending God's honor is a reward in itself. Let me go fight, and God will protect me. And he was so confident he would win, because if you're fighting for God, he said, then you will win. Okay. So you have a question? I want to make it a little...
I do. At this point, what was Saul's and David's relationship? Did they know each other beforehand?
Yes. At this point, David had already been, if we can assume, which is not always a safe assumption, if we can assume that the verses are written in chronological order, then David and Saul had already known each other. David was playing music in his palace.
Okay.
Right? And he was attending to him.
Okay.
Although after he wins, though, Saul asks, who's that boy? As we'll see. He says, who's that boy? So it seems some people have said that it's actually not in chronological order, and he had not started playing music for him. But I think we can assume that it's in the order that things happened, and therefore they already knew each other. Okay, and now we have the face-off between David and so Saul says to him, "Go." He gives him his armor. Saul was a tall man. David was short. He takes off his armor and he gives it to David. And the Midrash describes how it fit David perfectly. It should have been too long. It should have draped down onto the floor. It fit him perfectly. Now, I don't know what that means. Did it literally happen? Did it not? We always have to look at what the message the Midrash is conveying is. Saul, the king's armor, goes onto David and it fits him perfectly. As if to say, he's taking over this role. Right? At that moment, when Saul saw the confidence in David, he started getting an inkling of what was about to happen. He said, is this the guy that's going to take over my position? At this point, he started getting a little bit nervous. David marches off to face Goliath. He takes off the armor because he couldn't proceed. He wasn't used to schlepping around such heavy armor. He said, let me just take my staff, my shepherding staff, slingshot, and 5 stones. 5 stones, of course. 1 is to represent God. 3 to represent our forefathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And a 5th to represent Aaron, whose 2 sons Goliath had killed. So he wanted to use the merit of Aaron to avenge the blood of his sons. Everything here is so rich with symbolism. Now I want to freeze the frame. You have the little puny David standing in front of this giant encased in iron, Goliath. Who is Goliath? David we've met. Who is Goliath? What are his roots? This is so remarkable. This is so remarkable. If you haven't heard it, it was worth coming just for this.
Sorry, indirectly they're actually related, because Ruth's sister-in-law, I forget what her name is right now, but the thing is that she is the great-grandmother of Goliath.
Right. This is exactly what I'm getting. We know who his mother is. The verse in Shmuel base in chapter 21, it says, in the second book of Shmuel, chapter 21, it says that Goliath's mother was a lady called Harafa, Hey Reish Pei Hey. The Talmud relates this to the name Orpah. Orpah was the sister-in-law of Ruth, and the Midrash tells us they were actually also sisters. They were sisters, the daughters of Eglon, the king of Moab. His 2 daughters were Rus and Orpah. They both married brothers, Machlon and Kilion. Those boys died, and they accompanied their mother-in-law, Naomi, back to Israel. And Rus, they both say, Naomi, you're a widow. You've lost your husband. You lost your 2 sons. You've lost all your money. You're going to go back now, poor lady. We want to accompany. We want to come with you. We want to convert to Judaism and join you. And they start accompanying her. And then she stops and she says, don't join me. Right? This is the story that we read on Shavuos in the Megillah of Rus. Don't join me. Even if I had sons today, by the time they're old enough to be married, to marry you, it's useless. You're just going to be sitting around. Go back. Go live your lives. You're the daughters of royalty. Just go back. Don't join me. Orpah begins to cry, and she says, you're right. It's not worth it. Why should I come with you? You're absolutely right. I respect you, and I value everything you've done for me and our relationship, etc. She gives her kisses. She cries, and she goes back to Moab. Rus, Davkaba, Rus cleaved to Naomi, and she said, I will come with you. And sure enough, Rus ends up being the great-grandmother of David. So standing in front of us now, I don't know if they realized that they were related. The great-grandson of Rus, King David, is standing in front of Goliath, the Goliath, the son of Orpah. The Midrash says, Yavo ben hadvuka v'natzeach et ben haneshuka. the son of the one who cleaved should defeat the son of the one who kissed, or was kissed. Right? The Midrash links this face-off to that one incident when Ruth decided to go with Naomi and Orpah decided to go off her separate way. Now, I want to share some strange midrashim and try to make sense of them. It says that in the merit of the 4 tears that Orpah shed when she was separating from Naomi, her mother-in-law, in the merit of those 4 tears that she said, she merited having 4 giants, 4 powerful sons. And Shmuel Beis lists them. Goliath was one of them. He was actually not even the strongest. 4 powerful sons. He's called Isha Beinayim, the in-between man, which on the one hand means he was standing in between the mountain of the Philistines and the mountain of the Jews. That's where he physically was. It means that he was built like a binyan, like a building. It also means that he was in the middle of his brothers. He wasn't even the most powerful one. So she merited having Goliath in the merit of the 4 tears. And it also says, in the merit of the 40 steps that she accompanied Naomi to Israel, those 40 steps enabled Goliath to have power over the Jews for 40 days. Right? This right now is day 41. When David happens to appear on the scene and hear Goliath, it's been 40 days of cursing Hashem day and night, morning and night. He merited to have that power and control over the Jews for 40 days because of the 40 steps that his mother-in-law took. Now this should really disturb us. This doesn't seem to follow. She did something pure and good. She cried tears that she was parting from her mother-in-law. She took 40 steps to consider converting. You don't have to convert. There's no force, right? She took 40 steps to accompany her mother-in-law to Israel. From those 40 steps, she merits to have a wicked man cursing God in front of the Jewish people for 40 days. That's no fair, right? Why is that why is that reward? If anything, it's a punishment. Congratulations, you did something fantastic. Your descendant will be a completely wicked man. Why is that fitting? Right? Do you appreciate that this is a problem? Yeah, okay. I want to share some other interesting midrashim, and I think that will shine light on this. Why was she called Harapha in the 2nd book of Samuel? Her name was Orpah. Why is she called Harapha? This is a pretty graphic midrashim. The midrashim describe, and the Gemara in Sota on page 42 describes, the night after Orpah parted from Ruth, that very night, she just had become, she had completely let herself go. The Midrash says she cohabited with 100 men on that night. 100 men and a dog. She had just gone completely off a cliff. Isha Beinayim, Goliath, it's called Isha Beinayim. We said the man who stood in between. Beinayim also means Ben Yud, Nun Yud Mem, which is Gematria 100. He is the son of one of those 100 men. He didn't quite have an identity for his father because it could have been any of those 100 men. She had gone completely berserk. Now, what on earth happened? This is a lady who just shed tears. This is a lady who just accompanied her mother-in-law to Israel. What on earth happened? How could she go so low? And it goes on and on. Harapha means grain. Harapha, that name Orpah that switched to Harapha means grain because everybody had threshed with her as if you like you thresh grain. All of the townspeople had come and just used her just like you crush grain in a threshing floor. Everybody had trampled her. Unbelievably gross behavior, which is it's such a dramatic contrast to what she was just doing hours earlier, crying with her mother-in-law and considering conversion to Judaism. So this I think, if you give it a bit of thought, you'll recognize this as true. I discovered this yesod in Rav Chaim Shlomovitz's book, Sichot Musar. I recall reading it here, and then when I looked at it, he uses this as one of the examples. He says the general way of the evil inclination is slowly, bit by bit, chip away at the ice of a person, right? One day he'll say to him, just come a few minutes late to shul, and the next day he'll be a few minutes later. The next, you'll miss a day, a week, and then you'll end up, taking one Shabbos off, and then you'll just stop coming altogether. But it's slow and steady, right? I'm on a diet. Okay, but just have one cookie. Right? And the next day, it's understood you can have one cookie, maybe just a cookie and a half, and then another, right? It's always bit by bit. That's the standard mode of operation of the Yetzer Hara, of the evil inclination. He says there are times, though, when a person is in a situation of great distress, or he experiences something that just shakes him up, and you lose your bearings, you lose your stability. At that moment, you're in great danger. At that moment, you can fall a million miles down. When the Torah uses a large number, is it not another way of saying many? Yes, that's true. 100 literally, or is it just very many? Who knows, but it was very many. At a moment when a person's shaken up, now they're at risk for something serious, something severe. Orpah, here she was, accompanying her mother. She takes 40 steps. You can imagine what's going on through her head. And she's thinking the whole time, I'm going back now. I'm going to start an entire new life. I'm leaving my father's house. I'm leaving Moab, where I'm a princess. And I'm going to go to Israel to be with a widow. And I'm, but it's the right thing to do, and I want to do it. And you could hear that conversation she's having as she's taking those 40 steps towards Israel. And then her mother-in-law, proposes a rebuttal. No, you shouldn't do it. It's not worth it. You're going to waste your life away in Israel with me. Just go back to your home. And she says, you know what, you're right. And she rips herself away from this relationship. She cries, she gives her a kiss, and she rips herself away. And you can imagine Naomi and Ruth walking away, and Orpah licking her shoulder as she's walking back to Moab, and she just sees Ruth and her mother-in-law walking away. And Orpah is basically leaving behind that pure, wholesome part of herself that she just parted with. At that moment, she's just standing over a cliff, and she can lose herself completely. When a person suffers a great loss, they're vulnerable now to something tremendous. I think it's something you just think about it in our own lives, not on as great of a scale. But when you're shaken up, you can go much further than you ever would, right? Right? It's not just an extra cookie. When you hear something really distressful, that the diet is out the window. You spend the whole night on the couch eating ice cream and potato chips, right? It's not a minor. That's it. It's finished. You throw in the towel completely. Here, Orpah had ripped away from Naomi. She shook herself up and she fell to the depths. So it turns out that those four tears that she shed and those 40 steps that she took, those were like a spring, ended up being the catalyst for her great fall. So it's because of those 4 tears, she merited 4 giants who fought with Israel. Because of those 40 steps, that ended up leading to her downfall. And therefore, she was punished with a person who spent 40 days torturing the Jewish people and cursing God. So now, let's take a look at the showdown. I see, sorry, you have some messages in the chat here. 100 would cause her death. Okay, I don't know. I've never read up on this and what a person can handle or can't handle. Suffice to say, it was a lot of people. The Midrash is explaining, right? The inner depth is she had gone off the cliff. She had exposed herself. She had become Hefker. Yeah. In fact, it says that Goliath himself alludes to it without knowing it. When he sees David approaching him with a stick, he says, "What am I, a dog?" Right? His mother, in fact, was with a dog on that night. Right? The Gemara says he was referring to himself. He didn't even realize it. So now you look at the showdown. How much more meaning is there? It's David facing Goliath. It's David, the son of Ruth, who decided to go with Naomi, versus Goliath, whose mother decided to part from Naomi. I wondered here also, I need not speculate. The story itself is so fantastic. So, as we know, David loads up his slingshot I'm trying to get the verses for you here. David loads up his slingshot. And the truth is, he was hiding it. He brought a stick with him. This is just a practical point. When you're reading the story, he brings a stick and he has a slingshot with his stones. Why did he bring the stick? He never ended up using it, right? He took the rock, he slung it, and hit Goliath between the eyes. That one little part that was exposed in Goliath's armor was just a place for him to see. And the rock struck directly over there. But he ended up not using the stick. So the commentaries say actually that was an aversion, or the aversion, what's the word for it? Goliath thought that he was going to come at him with a stick, because if he saw a slingshot, he would have covered up his eyes. So he was expecting the stick, and David had it hiding in his bag. He quickly took out the slingshot, and with God's speed was able to release the sling. I just want to focus. It's getting late. I want to just highlight the conversation that took place between David and Goliath before they fought. Because this is it. This is the key to David's success. This is what he's been training for all of his years of upbringing. When he's out there tending to his father's sheep as an outcast, fighting against the entire world. Like, what reason did he have to hold on to his faith? Nothing. He's not going to get any honor. He's not going to get any recognition. It was just completely pure faith that was being built up David's entire life. When the Philistine caught sight of David, he scorned him, for he was but a boy, ruddy and handsome. Somehow, for some reason, you see this description of David here. Why is it relevant? He saw that he was red-haired, ruddy. He said, you must just have a need for violence. Look at you, a redhead, you have a need for violence. But you have this like pure and wholesome appearance, which obviously shows that you're not a man of war, Goliath says. But again, that reflects this dual man who David is, who's on the one hand able to be engaged in the external world of fighting, and yet inside he's yefeh mar'eh. He has pure eyes and the deep connection with Hashem. And the Philistine called out to David, "Am I a dog that you come against me with sticks?" He cursed him, "Come here and I will give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the field." So the Midrash picks up over here and says, beasts of the field, cattle do not eat meat. Cattle graze and eat the grass. When Goliath saw David, the Midrash said he actually started getting nervous. He couldn't mess that. He said, "Come here." He felt that he couldn't move forward anymore. Goliath started getting nervous when he saw this confident David. You can imagine the holiness that was just beaming from his face. A young boy with no armor whatsoever and a little stick in his hand. But he's coming in the name of God. The Midrash said that when David approached Goliath, he became afraid. He saw his stature and said, how am I going to do this? And then he heard Goliath speak and curse Hashem. And he said, he's hopeless. He's hopeless. If he completely denies God, then this is in the bag. It's in my hands. He realized that he's lowered himself to a subhuman level. You severed your connection with God. You're subhuman now. Finished. Goliath senses David's confidence. He senses David's holiness. He has to tell him, "Come here," because Goliath is afraid to step forward. And he starts to stumble in his speech. "I'll feed you to the beasts of the field." The beasts don't eat meat. He was trying to trip on his words. He should have said the chayot of the field. The beasts do not eat meat. David replied, "You come against me with powerful words. You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of Hashem, the Lord of hosts, the God of the ranks of Israel, whom you have defied." Right? I'm not here showing off my own power. I'm here fighting in the name of God. This day Hashem will deliver you into my hands. I'll kill you and cut off your head, and he'll give you the carcasses to the camp of the birds and the sky of the beasts of the earth. All of the earth shall know that there is a God in Israel. Basically, David gives a Shabbos Shuvah drasha to Goliath, right? It's nothing about flexing his muscles. It's nothing about his own power. It's all about Hashem. It's all about Hashem. And that, I believe, once again, just to bring it full circle so we can wrap it up. There's so much more to talk here. I hope I'm able to bring some of it forward. What gives David this ability to see through all of the garbage? It's not about the Philistine political situation. It's not about the man who's powerful. All there is God, right? It's his upbringing in that muck, in that murky, dark time that he had to endure. I have no desire to marry Shaul's daughter. I have no desire for wealth. I don't care about the honor. I just want to stand up for Hashem's name. That's what it took to forge a David. And now here he is standing against Goliath. And sure enough, all he has to do is just throw a rock, and he has such siyata dishmaya, such divine assistance that it pierces through armor or finds the exact spot. There's a great miracle. It says that Goliath fell forward. Really, he should have fallen backward because of the impact. It says he fell forward onto his face. For 3 reasons. Number 1 is he had idolatry carved onto his chest. So they wanted to disgrace the idolatry by smashing it into the earth. Number 2 is his mouth, which had cursed God, should now meet the dust. And number 3 is so that David wouldn't have to walk all the way to the other side of him to chop off his head. To make it more convenient for David, Goliath fell forward. He just had to take now a couple of steps. He sliced off his head. He brought it to Saul. And so on and so forth. Well, just to set the stage for next week, when I'll tell you this one incident which is critical, the turning point in the relationship of David and Shaul, and really the beginning of the downfall of Shaul is this. After Goliath dies, they make a great war with the Philistines and defeat them. And the women of the town come back singing. Hika Shaul be'alafav ve'David be'rivevotav. Saul defeated the Philistines with his thousands, and David with his tens of thousands. Now, what they meant was Saul had only only thousands of soldiers, and he made a great war. And David had extra help; he had tens of thousands, and he was also able to defeat. So they sang this song, they made up this song to praise the heroes of the war. Saul hears this, and he says, "Wait a minute! They gave David the tens of thousands and me the thousands." And at that point, he started to become jealous. He thought that they were trying to diss him, right? To say that I only killed 1,000 and he killed tens of thousands. That's not what they meant. But in his head, right, the moment he saw that armor fitting David, the wheels already started turning. And at this point, this was the turning point. And this becomes like a refrain. We'll hear this song throughout. That's the turning point for Shaul. And at this point, he starts to suspect David as trying to usurp the throne, and he's going to start throwing spears at him and stuff, and he's going to start facing him, and it's going to be a whole exciting endeavor. Okay, well, so God willing, maybe we'll get to that next week, or maybe we'll do Bathsheba next week. But God, I'm looking forward to it. I should say,